In a world where everyone seems to have not just a microphone, but a megaphone, the voices of our Gedalim, our Rabbanim and Rosh Yeshiva far too often seem to get lost in the noise. This podcast is here to change that. I'm your host, Hillel Eisenberg. Join me as we sit down with our nation's leaders as they address the ashkafic challenges that matter most, without the fluff and without the drama, with truth that doesn't flinch. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical podcast. This is Judaism without apologizing. Hello, everyone. I'm Hillel Eisenberg, and I'm thrilled to share with you the Judaism Without Apologizing podcast. This episode, I had the great honor and privilege to sit down with Rav Moshe Kestenbaum, who blew me away with his humility, his razor-sharp perception of people, his insight into some pretty thorny issues. Rav Kestenbaum has been around the Jewish bloc. He was a Rebbe in the Waterbury Yeshiva for many years. He's now the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Gedela Or Yitzchak, a post-Eretz Yisrael Yeshiva in Passaic. He's also a well-known mechanech. He's a speaker. He does parenting courses and marriage counseling. He's also the author of two of the most wildly used contemporary Musar Sfarim written in the last 30 years, called Eilam Amidas and Eilam Avoda, both have which been subsequently been translated by ArtScroll. He is also the author of two extremely popular English books. One is called Run After the Right Kavod, and the other one is called The Heart of Parenting. And he additionally has thousands and thousands of shiurim on a wide variety of topics on Torah Anytime. And we had a fascinating discussion about struggling teens and therapy and marriage and divorce and parenting and midas. And he gives an amazingly refreshing perspective on living a life as a Jew on fire in today's day and age. So I think you're really going to enjoy. Take a listen. Thank you, Rabbi Kestenbaum, for joining this podcast, Judaism Without Apologizing. It's a schus, an honor to have you on.
It's a schus to be here. Thank you.
So I want to dive right in. I know that you've seen the gamut of Bachrim struggling to Bachrim getting married to Bachrim married and now raising children. Those all require a separate set of questions, and I want to start from parenting, and we'll make our way down to the world of Bacherhood. Let's begin with our first question. Are there more struggling teenagers nowadays than there used to be, than 30 years ago, than even 20 years ago? Is that a myth? Is that fake news? And if it is in fact true, what would you say are the causes for that? And is there a sort of a fault in the parenting? Obviously, there's a million factors, but can you point to a potential flaw in modern day parenting which has led to the high numbers of struggling teens? Or you might disagree and say there are not, in fact, a high number of struggling teens.
It's a great question. I don't know the numbers. You know, the Jewish population has, Baruch Hashem, grown so much that a lot of things are hard to know. Do we have greater numbers just because we have more people? Or actually the percentages have risen? So the Jewish population used to be smaller. So it is hard to know. But I will share with you the following, which may explain why we have, or maybe a few reasons why we have greater problems today. Chazal tell us, a Gemara in Saita, that before Mashiach comes, chutzpah yaske, there's going to be a lot of chutzpah. Children today are naturally more disrespectful than they were. And it keeps on going up and up and up. And it's scary.
Why do you think that is?
Chazal tell it does. So it doesn't mean we can't explain it. Chazal say chutzpah yaski, the chutzpah is going to increase. Why? I don't have I think it's a decree from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think there's some positive side, positive things in it. But that's Chazal say, before Mashiach comes, chutzpah is going to increase.
When you say chutzpah, what are you referring to?
I'm referring to, as the Gemara says, the children speaking back to their parents. Children used to be more afraid, naturally, of their parents. I don't know about you, I don't know your age, but there are many things I didn't think about saying to my parents. And I'm sure my parents, I don't remember, they probably told me. I was pretty well behaved. But, I would have never thought of telling. That's going to go on like every generation. Everyone's going to tell their kid, I would have never dreamed of saying that to my. And it's hard to imagine that happening with our children today, our children telling their children, I would have never dreamed of saying that. That's pretty scary. That's pretty frightening. Children today are more disrespectful. And I would say it's exer from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And why I cannot tell you. But I think because of that, automatically we're going to have a tremendous challenge in front of us. Because many of the problems that arise is a child is disrespectful to the parent, whether verbally or maybe even their reaction to Yiddishkeit. It used to be children were more comfortable, I'm going to say more comfortable, they'd be willing to go along with what their parents told them. They may be willing to behave in yeshiva even if they're miserable. You had kids probably in Misifta years ago that were miserable. And they just went along and did what they were supposed to, even though they were miserable. That doesn't mean that it was a great situation. It doesn't mean that maybe later on there weren't problems with their Yiddishkeit. But I think there's a certain willingness to go along, a humility, subordinates. We'll go along, okay, this is what the rabbis say. In fact, you see that the yeshivas have really adapted by force. The yeshivas have adapted to be much warmer. Not all of them because maybe not all of them believe it as much as they should, but I think they're forced to, because if we're not going to be nicer, the kids are going to rebel. So the children kind of forced a revolution of chinuch, that we have to be more tolerant, we have to be softer. Now, some people think, and you'll get me back to where we were because I'm going to get lost, but some people think it's the other way around. Some people think that the reason why kids are so disrespectful is because parents are so liberal. And then you have these liberal mechanchim like Kestenbaum, who's telling parents to absorb and be soft and be understanding and not respond harshly to the behavior. And I'm the problem, because the kids are responding to that softness. And if we would just be tougher and we would, clamp down on the kids, they would behave. They wouldn't talk that way. Maybe they wouldn't dress that way. The reality is, as someone who's been in the field for quite some time, it's not true. And my experience is with parents that clamp down and are very tough and don't give in and put their foot down, doesn't lead to great results. The kids end up rebellious, running away, not in a good situation.
So how would you balance instilling structure in one's home, but also not having that rebellious backfire attitude from the child? Meaning, how do you have a balance? You can't have a free-for-all. Obviously, there has to be some sort of parental structure and guidance, and setting the red line in the sand, saying those things we don't do or those actions we don't do, but at the same time allowing the child to live his 20-25 life where he needs to be loved and empowered and etc.
It's a good question. I don't have the exact answer. I recently gave a parenting course, and I tell the parents, you'll do it your way. I don't have the exact answer. And there's not necessarily one way. There are some rules that I think apply to everybody, and that is parents, not becoming angry, really not becoming angry, not taking things personally. But at the end of the day, my view of chinuch is that chinuch is about teaching, not controlling. My job is to teach my child that he's not allowed to talk to me that way, that he should not act that way. My job is not to enforce chinuch. Even we teach our children to bench. I don't think we stand there over our child, making sure he benched, making sure she benched, making sure they said every word. That is going to lead to a lot of, resentment towards Yiddishkeit. Chinuch is to educate, is to teach, not to force. Parents very often think my job is to make sure my child did everything. Well, you can do that when your child is, 3 years old till maybe they're 13, 14, maybe. At some point, you cannot force them anyways. So I think the chinuch philosophy of teaching, not forcing, begins at a very young age. I want to teach my child right from wrong. And if my child's disrespectful, I will tell them, I should tell them, that's not how we should talk to a parent. But I'm not sure the approach is that I will lock them in the room if they do it again and force them into a position where they better be respectful, because otherwise the consequences will be so great that they don't have a choice. because I think that will lead to a child that's resentful. And I want to share with you something else. I tell this to the parents all the time. In terms of chutzpah, listen, there's a very important idea here. In marriages, when a husband's upset at a wife's upset at their husband, what is the proper way to communicate? As we're taught, that you should say it very nicely. I know you didn't mean anything, but it really upset me when you came home 10 minutes late and you didn't tell me. Unfortunately, and we can talk about that, but unfortunately, most people, I shouldn't say most, many people do not communicate with their spouses that way. When they are angry, when they're upset, they let them have it. Maybe they control it and temper it a little bit, but it's not usually in the nicest, controlled way possible. When a child today is disrespectful to their parents, all they are doing is expressing their feelings. It used to be a child was afraid to express their feelings to the parent, so they didn't. Today, not because the parent would beat them up, but there was a certain fear of the parent, which is deteriorating, as Chazal tell us. So what do we want from the 13-year-old, 14-year-old, or even 10-year-old? What do we want from them? We want them to come to us and say, Mommy, I know you really love me, and I feel bad complaining because you're always so good to me, but I have to say it does bother me when you don't buy me enough clothing, and other girls in my class have this. Is that what we're expecting from a 13-year-old? And by the way, many, many parents will respond to that, even if they say it nicely. But you don't ask, okay, so you can have two options. Your child, doesn't communicate to you, or I'm not sure the other option. Your child will not communicate with you. Your child is not going to be able to talk to you at 13 years old the way that most 30 and 40-year-olds are not able to talk to their spouse. So the child is going to communicate with anger because Chazal say they're less afraid of the parents, which in my view, which is a bit chiddush, there's a big bracha here. There's a big blessing here. My child can actually tell me what they're upset about. They can actually communicate. I recently, in this parenting course, I told the parents that maybe your child is angry at you, and maybe your relationship is in a bad place. Well, when your child yells at you, and they're actually saying something that has some content in it, that's an opportunity. You could just yell back, you could just walk away, or you could say, I see you're really upset about this. I want to talk to you about it. What an incredible lesson we teach our children when we don't act like children. We want to teach our children not to speak disrespectfully. We want to teach our children not to have the bad mead of kas, very bad mead of anger. So what do? Our child yells at us, and we yell back. So we're doing exactly what we shouldn't be doing, and role modeling exactly what our child is doing. We're the adult. We have to, if our child screams at us, we should tell them, it's not respectful, but I want to talk to you about what's bothering you. And when you're ready to talk, let's talk about it. And if you're a real tzaddik, you're a real tzaddikis, you go back to the child 3 hours, 4 hours later and say, you were screaming at me before. I didn't like the way you're communicating, but you're obviously upset about this. Let's talk about it. Wow, that's greatness. That's greatness. In order to be a parent today, and maybe this is why Hashem created chutzpah, number one, to enhance the relationship that we're able to have with our children. But number two, you know what? You become a big person today if you're a good parent. You cannot be a good parent today without being a big person. Because if you don't have self-control, if you're going to take things personally, if you don't have control over your anger, you're going to have a very hard time dealing with your child, unless they're a goody-goody, which some children are.
Let me interject on that point exactly. Have we come to a point in our society where our schools are so perfect or amazing or systemized or fantastic and well-run, oiled machines where parenting has become the duty of the school incorrectly, where parents on a subliminal level or sometimes on a conscious level say these schools are so big and their brand is so massive and the rebbeim are so good and the system is so awesome and they've got detections for every form of educational problem that they come in and swoop in and help out. On a little tiny but increasing level, the parental duties are shifted to the school, and therefore the parents relinquish the roles of major mashpiyim, the primary hashpa, onto the child. Instead, it's the school doing it, and therefore the parents are sort of exaggerated babysitters. Is that accurate or not accurate? And if it is accurate, how do we sort of retain the checks and balances separating church and state, where the school teaches Aleph and Beis, and the parents teach midas and proper ethical behavior?
That question really reflects a complete miss on what chinuch is. It's not just teaching your kids how to learn Torah, teaching your kids how to make blessings. That's not the only part of chinuch. And if that was the only part of chinuch, teaching your children halacha and teaching your children to bench, then you're right, the school does most of that. Of course, we'll talk. There's more to it than just telling them what to do. But the most important part of chinuch is the love, respect, relationship you give to your child. Today's children that chas v'shalom are off the derech, it's not, as people mistakenly think, a Yiddishkeit problem. I have not seen a healthy, emotionally healthy 15-year-old, 16-year-old who did well in school and is like, philosophically, I have questions on the creation and I'm going to go to Harvard and etc. go off the derech. We don't have maskilim today. It's unbelievable. Baruch Hashem, we don't have that intellectual people going off the derech. People going off the derech because they're in pain, because they don't feel good about themselves, because unfortunately they're rejected sometimes in school because of ADHD, because they struggle academically and all types of problems. They chas v'shalom go off the derech because they feel rejected by their parents, rejected by their community. It's all emotional health issues. Our number one responsibility as parents is to be, pardon my vernacular, to be a good mom, to be a good dad, to be a good mom, to be a good dad. I don't care, say it like a non-Jew, a good mom, a good dad, who loves his child and his child loves him and loves her, and your child is close to you. That's number one, and that the schools cannot do. The Rebbeim could say from today to tomorrow, I love my Talmidim. They don't love their Talmidim like a parent loves their child. Rahman al-Islam, La Yaleinu, we had a terrible car accident, years ago. 2 precious Bachram passed away in this car accident. The other ones that survived, many of them were in the hospital. Who was sleeping in the hospital by their bed? Their parents. The Rebbeim, we love them, we visit them, we care for them. Who's by their side? Their parents. No one could replace a mother. No one could replace a father. Schools do not replace that. Schools can teach. Only parents can give the children the love and the self-esteem that they need. Schools can help. Schools can do a lot of damage. But the most important people in a child's life is a mother and a father. And in terms of teaching our children the laws, the halachos, the midos, and everything like that, it's mostly taught by example. We see the children see us bench, the children see us daven, the children see us learn, etc. They're influenced by that. But of course, and all the teaching and all what to do is not nearly as important as the role modeling. And who are people that are going to want a role model? A mom that they hate, a dad that they can't stand, or a mom that they love. My mom is so loving to me. I love her. I love my dad. So I want to be like him. And we're so busy, unfortunately, so busy with that. It's such a mistake. Because if we have this strong relationship, we don't have to be always telling them what to do. They're going to want to do. They're going to want to be like us. They're going to want to follow the beautiful Torah we have. One of the things I've seen that really bothers me, I do some counseling on the side, not often, but I get the feeling with parents many times, if their child is having a problem, they hand them off to the therapist. So let's hand them off to the therapist, and the therapist will deal with the problems. And I'm being a good parent because I'm paying. It's expensive. I'm paying for the therapy. That's a terrible mistake on many, many levels. I've had parents bring me their child, and I saw quickly that the child wasn't really the entire problem, if that. The parents needed help. No therapist working with your child for an hour, whether they're talking, whether he's playing video games, whatever they're doing for that hour, no therapist can replace the parent. And I think it's irresponsible, by the way, for any therapist, barring a crazy situation, to be working with a child and not be working with the parents.
Wow.
Because if you would help the parents are the most necessary components to that child's well-being. So nice you're working with that child, And I'm not talking about a child who's 20 years old and the parents are crazy and he has to be away from them. But in a normal situation, even a difficult situation, you have to try to work with the parents who are in the best position to help the child. And I think yeshivas that work with children must feel a responsibility to guide the parents. Because when you help the parents, you will help the child a lot more. You're the Rebbe, you're the therapist, you'll spend an hour a week with the child. If you spent that hour with the parents and got the parents to be more understanding, more compassionate, and build a relationship with the child, the parents would help the child.
What should a Rebbe or a therapist do to approach the parents who, in 100% out of the cases, will be in denial of their flaws?
So first of all, if the parents you have to find out if the parents have flaws in their parenting. You have to find out. If the parents are perfect and the child has a disorder, which is rarely the case, and even if the child has a disorder, it's usually impacted by how the parents are reacting to that disorder. You have to find out as a therapist, in my opinion, it's your responsibility to find out how the parents are handling the child. And if it needs to be corrected, you need to talk to the parents. I don't want to talk to the parents because I'm scared they're not going to listen. Well, that's irresponsible. If the parents don't listen, you tried. And then, by the way, you're in a tricky situation, which I don't have the answer. But on one hand, you're working with a child, and the child is telling you, my parents are always yelling at me. So what are you going to do? Tell the child, oh, your parents are right? Now, I'm not saying therapists, there are a lot of therapists, I shouldn't say a lot. There are therapists, unfortunately, that wedge between the children and the parents and cause a lot of damage. And that's not the right thing to do. A child needs his parents. And you don't want to cause, a wedge between them. But on the other hand, you can't lie to the child either and tell them, oh, your parents are right for yelling at you because you misbehaved. No, they shouldn't be yelling. This is a very big pet peeve of mine. It is such a terrible crime when a therapist keeps on working with a child and doesn't work with the parents. It's a crime. They could have saved the kid's life. You're working with a child an hour a week. Very unlikely going to save the kid's life if the kid's in a dysfunctional relationship with his parents. But you could save the kid's life by working with the parents. Baruch Hashem, a number of times over the years, I sat down with the child and his parents, and we talked things out. And I've seen miracles. I've seen such beautiful things happen. But I will tell you, I've dealt with two different types of parents. Mostly the first. I've dealt with parents that said, please tell me what I could do better, because I want to help my child. And they're actually willing to listen to me when I tell them, well, if your kid says this to you, you can't scream at them. And if your kid needs this, you have to think about maybe your kid does need it. And they accept it. And then you do have some select parents that no matter what you tell them, no, I did everything right, they just refuse to hear that they've made mistakes. And this is why the world needs Musar. This is what my Rebbe, Reb Perzatzal taught. We need Musar. We need to be willing to be honest and admit we made mistakes.
There's an interesting thing that you write here in the Ilam Midas. I even underlined it many years ago on that line you just said about needing Musar. Fascinating. You say here that learning Musar and improving one's Midas is more important than the kiyum of the actual mitzvahs of the Torah. And obviously, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties of what
That's not me. That's Reb Chaim Vital.
Right. You're quoting Reb Chaim Vital. But I actually wanted to focus on an even stronger concept, which is that those that are sitting and learning but are not actively working on their midos, they're not considered as if they are sitting and learning. It's considered like, I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but their limud Torah is not at its best, or it's not the correct fulfillment of limud Torah if your midos are not being actively worked on. Did I accurately paraphrase your statement, or
yes,
no?
Yes. There are many sources. The Vilna Gaon says the purpose of a person's life is to work on his midas. The Alter Nevardik says the whole Torah was given to perfect a person's character. And the truth of the matter is, Torah perfects a person's character if the Torah is learned properly. And if we see someone that learns Torah and doesn't have good midos, that's perforce a sign that they're not learning Torah with the right reasons. They're not learning Torah at all lishma. And of course, as the Gemara tells us in Yuma, it's a big chil Hashem when someone learns Torah and doesn't have good midos. And it causes, of course, tremendous damage in chinuch. If a Rebbe is teaching Torah and doesn't have good midos, a parent that's religious, and certainly a parent that even is a Talmud Chacham, that doesn't have good midos, of course, is a tremendous, harm to the children, to society.
So why is it that we don't see this as an emphasis? You don't walk into a shul at 9:30 and see 25% of the people learning Misos Sharim or Shari Tshuva or Nefesh HaChaim. Musar Seder in yeshivas are notoriously empty. It's just not a focus whatsoever. And if what you're saying is true, that the focus and the ideal of our lives is to perfect our midos, and learning Torah while neglecting to work on our midos is essentially a bracha levatala. So then why, in fact, isn't it sort of on the pedestal of where it should be?
I don't have an answer. But first of all, I want to share with you, why maybe part of why it is this way. First of all, when you talk about certain svarim, Shari Tshuva, Misyos Yesharim, they're very much primarily Ben Adam L'Makom Svarim. So it's a little bit less Midos focus. You have parts, famous Parak Mishram, Parak Alf about Midos, but it's not the focus of many of. There's two types of. There are different aspects of Musar. Musar is a broad word. There's Musar in Ben Adam L'Makom, and there's Musar in Ben Adam L'Chavero. But let me tell you why I think Musar is not so popular, especially Ben Adam L'Chavero, especially Midos, because people think it's simple. First of all, people think it's simple. If you ask somebody, what does it mean to have good midos? You're a nice guy. You don't scream at people. People don't realize how complicated it is to have really good midos. Real good midos, first of all, is not just external behavior, that you don't go around screaming at people. There's a lot of internal work inside of you, inside of ourselves. Are we jealous of people? Do we want good for people? Are we angry inside? As they write in the Sefer, in marriage, a lot of real midos come out. And as Reb Chaim Vital says, we can judge a person's midos by how he treats his wife. I'll add, as a wife maybe treats her husband. And because with everyone else, you don't scream and yell because you want to look good. But with your spouse, in the privacy of your home, the truth comes out. I'll tell you something else. I speak to my Bachram about midos, but not only speak to my Bachram about midos, the last few months, I do once a week a Shalom Bayis course. And many of the Bachram are not even dating yet. But it's valuable to hear it now because in Mirz Hashem, they'll keep it in their head. Even when I used to teach 11th grade, I would talk about these things. And, one particular married person I have in mind, he said to me that he remembers now, he's married years later, he remembers what I taught him in 11th grade, and it's made an impact. So, for example, I spoke to the Bachar. A person, you talk about a Bachar and you ask for a resume, you ask for information. You say, what type of Bachar is? He's a very edel. He's a very edel Bachar. He's very edel. He's very sweet. So you think, until I got married a little bit, you think that if you're a sweet guy, you're going to be a great husband. You're a sweet guy. You can't hurt a fly. So I told the Bachram, yeah, he can't hurt a fly, but he wished he could kill a few. Many of the people that are very soft, but they're holding a lot of anger inside. Their roommate's taking things, they don't want to say anything. Either they're scared or because they think that's good midos, and maybe to some extent, but really they have a lot of anger inside. And then they get married, and their wife is doing things they don't like, and they have no idea what to do with it. To express it, they don't know how to express it. Because when did they ever express when something was bothering them? To hold it in, they know how to do, but then they have anger. And when it was with their roommate, they don't have to be with their roommate. They can just take a walk. But their wife, if they do take a walk on their wife, it's not very nice. It's going to be quite insulting. And they don't know what to do. And sometimes it comes out in anger, and sometimes it comes out with maybe even worse, is they just keep it locked in, and they're carrying a lot of anger, and it's felt. And a lot of problems come out. Being a Baal Midos is quite complicated and takes a lot of wisdom. You can't just expect, and we expect, in our yeshiva, we don't focus on Musar, we don't focus on understanding ourselves, we don't focus on working on ourselves, we focus on learning Torah, and of course, we teach the Bachrim to be nice guys. If we do that, we teach them to be nice guys. And then we expect them to get married, and their wife says something they don't like, and they're just going to be able to deal with it. And if they need to tell their wife something, they'll be able to, and there is an important place for communication. How are we expecting them to do that? And then they have children, and their child's disrespectful, and you expect them to do what I asked them to do. Stay calm. Understand that they're in pain. Don't take it personally. How do you expect the person to do that without serious work on themselves?
So what if a 19-year-old bacher comes to you and says, I want to work on my midos, but don't just tell me to read Shari Tshuva. I want to practically, learning Musar Svarim oftentimes is just a hisayrus to the concept that I need to go ahead and work on my midas. So what is the practical next step of working on my midas?
So with all arrogance, and I'm not saying my saver is the only one, but the difference of, let's say, an Olam Amidos, of a more classical sefer, is in Olam Amidos, we don't just tell you not to get angry. We tell you ideas and thoughts of how maybe to work on yourself, not to get angry. And that's so important. And so important. I spoke in my daughter's seminary a few months ago, and I said to them, I said, I want to tell you, it's not okay for you to scream at your husband. It's not okay for you to scream at your husband. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. And if a wife screams at her husband, the husband should be a man and take it and stay calm and talk respectfully back. But it's not okay for a woman to scream at her husband. It's hachazal. Anger is forbidden. Einaz dvarim is forbidden. You have an obligation, if your husband forgot something or came home late, to talk to him about it, not scream at him and call him names and yell at him. That's a very basic thing. Hopefully they're teaching that in schools and seminaries. I don't know. But it's a basic thing. Now, if people at least learned Olam Midos or learned another Mussar Sefer, it doesn't have to be my Mussar Sefer, but if someone learned that, that's very valuable. At least I can look at myself in the mirror and say, I shouldn't have screamed at my husband. I have to apologize for screaming at him. Not apologize maybe I'm right about what he did wrong, but I have to take responsibility for my behavior. Many people, men and women, live their whole lives, I was right for screaming because they did that. There's no responsibility. No, Hashem expects more from us. Hashem expects us to work on ourselves. Now that's one piece, knowing that I have to work on myself. Yes, there's another piece, to putting into action, but if you don't have the first piece, there's nothing to talk about. There's so much depth in me though. Listen, Hashem gave me a big gift. I wouldn't be talking to you about this if not for my Rebbe, Ray Peretz Zatzal. He gave a daily Musarvad for about a half an hour every day in Yeshiva Frockway. You talk about yeshivas where they're running away by Mussar Seder. First of all, you're putting a sefer in front of them, expecting to learn it, so that itself is maybe not as fun. But my Rebbe gave us a vad, a class, every single day. And it was so enjoyable. It was so geschmack. He would point out to us the human nature, how funny we are, how flawed we are. And he had just an amazing sense of humor, so the way he did it was just amazing. But it was so engaging and it was so exciting. And it really excited me the rest of my life, and certainly the next 10 years, after that, to really be aware and conscious and understand myself and pay attention to myself. So it's very hard to expect someone that wasn't exposed to that kind of Musar that my Rebbe gave to even understand its significance and have that appreciation for it. I would only hope, as the Hashem, through this podcast and Baruch Hashem, is just spreading awareness that we have to find Svarim. My Rebbe has, Baruch Hashem, they wrote over things from him, Mind Over Man. Find Svarim that talk about it in a way that you find engaging, stimulating, and it's a whole world of wisdom. It's a world of wisdom.
So circling back to marriage for a second, I want to delve into that. Are there more divorces nowadays amongst younger people than there were 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Or it's just everyone knows everyone nowadays more than we did 30 years ago? Meaning you very often hear about 24-year-olds who are getting divorced. Not saying it's a global pandemic,
right,
but it's creeping up. Is that accurate? And if it isn't accurate, why is it happening? And what are perhaps steps we can take to stop that?
So I don't know. I don't know the numbers, whether it's more or whether there's more Yidden and more news goes around. I don't know. But there are reasons to think why it may make some sense that we could have more problems today. Like we said, there's more chutzpah today. It used to be, many of us can think of our grandparents or great-grandparents. It used to be people stayed married. not necessarily in the perfect relationship where they may be fighting and arguing, but they loved each other and there was a commitment to each other. I don't know if we're as committed as we used to be. In general, just, people move from thing to thing, whether it's because we're just used to having things quickly. I don't know if we have the same level of commitment that we used to. Part of marriage, part of the foundation of marriage is I'm committed to this person and I'm committed to working it out. So I don't know if we have the same level of commitment. People may be quicker to it's not working out. Maybe, I don't know. I also think there are going to be many challenges today which are going to affect marriage. Communication. So today, communication, because of phones, I think, is weaker. People don't have to communicate verbally. They could send a text. So they can come into marriage really not having good communication skills. We also have challenges with technology, which may also impact, whether it impacts the man because of what he's seen, whether, unfortunately, during marriage there are issues. So that also has, I'm sure, played a role in divorces. So there is a variety of factors. I will say that I believe strongly it's our responsibility to prepare our young men and women for marriage. We have them, Baruch Hashem, unbelievable. We have them in yeshiva. Most boys are in yeshiva till they get married, and many of them after. But they're in yeshiva till they're married, and if they go to work earlier, they're still there for quite a long time. The girls are in school through seminary. We have time to teach them. We must teach them. We must teach them, number one, the importance of working on your midos, working on yourself, getting to understand yourself. There is more talk today about being emotionally healthy, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm not talking about referring to being emotionally healthy, which maybe overlaps with midos, but you're a healthy person overall, but really understanding yourself, working on yourself. That has to be a focus in yeshivas. I'll be honest, not everybody is right pairs, that's all. Not everyone can teach it. But maybe the Rosh Hashiva gives an unbelievable shir on the Gemara, is not equipped to teach it. It's not a flaw on the Rosh Hashiva. Everyone has their strengths. For myself, who hope and qualified to teach some midas, I couldn't give the high level shir in many yeshivas. So everyone has their strengths, but we should recognize this needs to be done. So if I can't do it, do I have a rebbe? Do I have a mashgiach? Do I have someone who could do it? Am I looking to hire somebody who can do it? Maybe I can bring someone once a week who could do it. Maybe I can give them svarim that I appreciate, or someone else can tell me, maybe I'm just not into this, but I can get them to the svarim.
1 second, can I just interject? The yeshivas, the typical bacher is going to Mesivta and then yeshiva for 3 years, and then he's going to Eretz Yisrael, and he's going to BMG. So the time to educate on marriage and preparation for marriage that obligation would be thrust on the Mir or Brisk or Yagdia or wherever they're going in Eretz Yisrael, and then on BMG. Neither institution, I think, is running to give midos clinics, maybe the Mir a little bit, but certainly not Brisk or Yagdia and certainly not BMG. So the question is, are you suggesting that these institutions should in fact have these? I mean, I know there are vadim.
Listen, they're not listening to me and Brisk.
No, I know. I'm saying in a utopian world.
I just say, first of all, I think we should be stressing midos in Mesivta. There's no reason we shouldn't be stressing midos in Mesivta. We should be stressing midos in elementary school. There's a lot to talk about this. The fact that, I don't know if it still exists, but the fact that I have a feeling that it may exist, that there's a concept of freshie treatment in a yeshiva, is antithetical to what it means good midos, which is you're nice to everybody, you're respectful to everybody. We have to be teaching good midos, and we could start at a very young age, but through Mesivta, through Beis Medrash, teaching midos. So that was the first part I was in the middle of talking about, teaching people the importance of working on their midos. That's probably, in my opinion, the most important part. If you give me a bacher that has been working on his midos, he's been learning, he's been learning all the midos, he's been working on himself, even if he's not prepared for marriage, I'm pretty comfortable with that guy. You know why? Because he's been working on himself, and then when he gets thrown the curveballs in marriage, he's got some footing. He's going to work on it. He's going to figure it out. and he cares to figure it out, most importantly. Give me a girl, I feel that's one of the greatest chusim Hashem gave me, that girls are actually learning Midos, that girls are actually learning Musar, because that was not so common, because they didn't learn Mesil, So girls actually learning Musar, such a great zechus, that girls are learning Musar. Even if they don't know about marriage, they're already ahead of the game. Oh, I'm not supposed to be screaming at husband. I have to work on myself. That's already like we're 80% there. We're in a good place. Now, is it beneficial and important to also teach specifics about marriage? Yes. And that I would say you can wait. If whether you'll have to decide. I have no problem doing it with younger base marriage guys, because I don't know if I know what's going to happen when they're older. So let me do it now while I know I can do it. Also, it is connected to regular midos too. It's not just marriage is not in a vacuum. But I think we need some specific, and there are in BMG vadim and this and that. But my question is, are we like something we're demanding and saying, like, you have to be listening, you have to be working on it, you have to hear, or it's like it's a nice thing. It's more than a nice thing. It's critical. Talk about children. One of the greatest impacts, as the Gedalim taught, Rav Pam and others, Shalom Bayis has great impact on our children. We have to work on ourselves. To be a good husband, to be a good wife, needs work.
So what advice would you tell a pair, a couple that is trying their best to create a house of Kedusha and Tara and Avodas Hashem? What advice would you tell them to help them be happy, successful Jews who happen to be living in America, as opposed to happy, successful Americans who happen to be Jews? And to specify what I mean is, very often you could have people that they were learning in Kaila for 2 years or 3 years, and they had a wife who went to fresh out of seminary. She's they're all inspired. And then they enter the workforce, and the itch to make a lot of money kicks in, and they look around and they see that wealthy people are celebrated, and it becomes more and more difficult to say, Ruchnius is my ikr, working on my midas is my ikr, my emotional bank account is completely used up by the effort to attain wealth and style and food, good food, vacation, whatever it is. What advice would you give to somebody to starting out, to circumnavigate, to prevent that from happening, to stare in the eyes of a society that very, very much focuses on attaining wealth and building bigger and bigger houses, and saying, you know what, I'm going to be okay with making $200,000, feeding my family, and making sure Lima Torah is the ikr.
$200,000. That's a lot of money.
$300,000, whatever it is.
You got up. That's what we've come to.
Meaning it's very, very...
This is a new topic, right?
Not really. I'm saying it in the context of marriage, because you have a couple that was together on board, ready to build a house that's filled with Kedusha, and then it sort of peters out a little bit when they see, hey, we can make money. And
okay, so first of all, I really think there's a big difference between midos and shifas for Torah and Ruchnius. There is a difference. Of course, midos is a chelak in Torah and a chelak of growth and being a yid. And I also want to say, I don't think anyone looks at themselves as Americans. I think everyone really, even if they get caught up in things, view themselves as Yidden, as Jews, as precious Yidden. If a person cares about midos, and a husband cares about how he's treating his wife, and a wife cares about treating her husband, and we have to teach men and women in yeshiva that that's their foremost obligation, to be a good husband, to be a good wife, to really work on yourself. So I think that can carry through really under all circumstances. Because even if you don't have the time, even if you're not learning as you should be, and we can talk about that, and even if you're not as focused as Ruchnis as you were before, but the midos is something it's really easy to focus on, because you're always interacting with people, and you're always interacting with your wife. And by the way, one of the beautiful things about midos is you could keep it on you at all times. I don't believe midos is about learning a sefer. I wrote on my midos from a collection of 10 years of sitting in my brain as I was dealing with situations on the ground, not from reading Sfarim. It's from dealing with my own life's experiences, dealing with my own jealousy, dealing with my own anger. That's what's shared in there. So if somebody works on their midos, cares about their midos, what happens is he takes that to work. When there's someone else at work that he's jealous of, he thinks about that. I'm jealous of him. I have to work on it. Let me think about why I shouldn't be jealous. Oh, I'm not being so nice to him because I'm jealous, or I don't want him to get a promotion, so I'm not saying something nice to the boss. That's not good midos. That's not right. I have to trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I'm going to say something nice. So you bring Hashem into your world, because midos involves, typically in work, we're involved with other people. So really, midos really can connect us, bring kedusha into the world, into our workforce. So I don't think that the midos will be actually, of course, if you get caught up in money, maybe it can turn you into having bad midos. But I think the midos could really stay strong, even if you're not as strong in the learning as you should be. In terms of how we stay connected to our Torah, to our values, and not get caught up in the rat race. So first of all, just to be malah mitzchas a little bit, I think a lot of people are not. I think it's a little bit exaggerated about everybody trying to become rich. I think today the cost of living is so high, is everybody's trying to survive. Now you could argue about whether their standards, people's standards are too high, but the cost of living, even when you try to keep things on a lower standard, are very, very high and very expensive. So I think a lot of people are working hard to make money, not necessarily because they want to be millionaires, because they're trying to survive. They're trying to pay their bills. Life is expensive. You threw out in passing $200,000. I mean, if you would have told me 10 years ago about $200,000, that's a rich man, $200,000. So there's a lot of pressure just to survive. In terms of in general guidance of how to keep the she'ifais, I think it's important a person is connected. A person has to connect himself to something. We can't do it alone. You have to find a shul. Either you live near a yeshiva, amazing, but most of us don't, or it doesn't work. It's for younger boys. But we're connected to a shul that it's not just a shul where we come to daven. There's a shul where they have learning going on. And I'm connected to a chabur of people that are growing. And we also think about where we're living. Am I living in a neighborhood which the people, unfortunately, are not so connected to Ruchnius? They're all just talking about their newest clothing. I have to think about where I want to live. Who we surround ourselves with has a tremendous impact.
So you have been dealing with struggling Bachrim for a long time, and I think that it's fair to say that certainly in America, we've come a long way as a society in Klal Yisrael in dealing with struggling boys. Can one make the argument that we've developed such grand institutions and retreats and camps where it could almost be conceived as a lechatchila path, where you have a mediocre bacher who's in a good yeshiva, but it's traditional, it's cold, the rebbeim are old, it's stark, it's intense, and he looks across the pond and his friends who he grew up with who are struggling but are in this yeshiva with emotionally dynamic rebbeim, and it's fun, and there's kumsitzes and there's trips and there's whatever. Is there a risk that we're gonna be attracting Bachrim who do not need that genuine chizik, who, if those places weren't plastered all over the world, they would muster up the self-motivation to steig, to come to Seder, to learn stark? Is that a problem? Is that a problem that there's no way around it? What would you say?
It's an excellent question. I know there are people, I don't know specific people. I was a Rebbe in Waterbury for many years. I know people that had tainas on Waterbury because they felt that their kids were not happy in their yeshiva because they saw the action going on in Waterbury, and maybe some kids left their yeshiva to go to Waterbury. But I want to tell you as follows. Every boy needs chizuk. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be putting into every yeshiva. I'm not saying we fire old rebbeim, but lechatchila we should be putting rebbeim into chinuch that are dynamic, that do connect with the boys, that can give the boys chizuk, support. Chinuch, a lot of chinuch is giving Bachrim kavod. I literally just wrote an article. It's being published this week in the Ated. The number one ingredient in chinuch. In my opinion, the number one ingredient in chinuch is kavod, is giving a kid respect, is making a kid feel that he's important because he is, not because you're lying, because he is. He's a Ben Hashem, she's a Bas Hashem. Most of the kids I mentioned before that fall off is because they don't feel good about themselves. So the reason why many of these yeshivas that work with kids are struggling and are successful is because they're giving the children the chizuk. They're giving the children the encouragement. They're giving the children the space. There needs to be, in my opinion, different yeshivas, of course. But I don't think there's a yeshiva that should not have tremendous amount of chizuk, tremendous amount of warmth for the boys. To say that this top yeshiva, where the guys are mamish learning, 24/7, to say that they don't need the chizuk, the warmth in that other yeshiva, I wouldn't say those words. I would say they may be able to survive without it. Of course, we do have, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, fall out from the top yeshivas. Sometimes fall out while they're still in Mesifta, sometimes fall out when they're Beis Medrash, and sometimes fall out 5-10 years into marriage, Le'aleinu. There are a lot of people that just go through the system. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to mess up their shidduch. They don't want to upset their parents. Everything looks good on the outside, so they keep going and going and going, but there's a lot of unhappiness, a lot of challenges that are not being dealt with. So, kina seifrim tar bechachma. If a yeshiva that has warm rebbeim and has a lot of chizuk, is drawing, and they want to leave because they want that, so learn from them, in my opinion. Bring the chizuk. Now, I want to be clear here. Yes, some of those yeshivas have a lot of allowances and a lot of free-for-allness that they need to have for the kids that they have. The kid that's learning well in a strong yeshiva doesn't want that. He doesn't want that. Even those kids in those yeshivas that are letting them dress and not go to shir and whatever it is, like I mentioned before, those kids are in pain. Those kids are usually fallouts, have usually been rejected from their elementary schools, from their previous Mesifta, often, unfortunately, from their families, from their communities. They've been rejected. So it's a big mistake. I tell this to parents, like when they have one older child that's struggling and they make allowances for them and they say, well, my younger child, now he's going to want a smartphone and he's going to want to do that and he's going to want a thing. So I can't let my older child have those allowances because then my younger child's going to want to. It's not exactly the case. If a child's happy and he's doing well, he's not looking around. So he's not looking around saying, I want to be like that kid with long hair and doing whatever he wants. That kid's struggling. I'm happy. He's happy. He's happy where he is in yeshiva. And Baruch Hashem, the kids, for the most part, that are in the strong yeshivas are very happy. And the yeshivas are doing a great job. Do I feel, I don't know which ones, do I feel I'm sure there's some of them that need to give the kids more chizuk? I'll tell you the problem, the challenge I think there is in the very stark yeshivas. When every kid in that yeshiva is learning till 12 o'clock at night, I think it's very hard for that child who learns till 12 o'clock to feel special. And very often he's trying to learn till 12:30, to 1 o'clock, so he can feel special. And that to me is tragic. How special it is a bachar learning, not till 12 o'clock, it could be 10 o'clock. However many hours, how special it is that the bachar is learning Torah. And I feel we have to do a better job, and I'm not pointing fingers at any yeshiva, but we have to do a better job of making every kid feel, deservedly so, that he's wow, you're a ben Torah. You're so chashuv. You don't have to out-compete. And unfortunately, some yeshivas suffer terribly from this, the competition. You don't have to compete. It's not you're the best bacher because you got the best shot or you learned the most hours. Every yid, meine mispar l'kechavim. Hashem, every yid's a star. Every yid's precious. I think we have to do a better job that every yid in every bacher in yeshiva feels like $1 million. He gets the chizuk he needs. And he won't be looking at other places because, they're getting, the Rebbe loves him. The Rebbe doesn't love you? That's a problem. That's a problem. That's a problem. You have tainas on another yeshiva because the Rebbeim are so nice. So be nicer. They're right. Be nice. Be nice.
What would you say to a bacher who's in a mainstream yeshiva, but he's not the top 1%, and therefore he is struggling to find self-worth, and he is slowly declining, but not that he wants to, and not that he's struggling, doesn't have any emotional health issues. It's just he's not the top one, and the top 1% often are the ones that get the spotlight. It's either the top 1% or the bottom 1%, which is always in the Manal's office and gets all the attention from the Manal because he pulled the fire alarm where he got caught with cigarettes, right? So it's those two, and then everyone else is like. So what do you do with a bacher who he's just coasting, but he doesn't want to, and he genuinely wants to be great, but he's mediocre and he becomes internally a little bit depressed? What would you say to such a bacher?
Listen, if I met with him privately, I would try to give him a lot of chizuk and try to explain to him how special he is.
No, but it would never come to the point. He would never go to a Rebbe and express his feelings because his Rebbe is 70 and is a Magachir and not the type. And there's no second Seder Shalom Yeshu that's Geschmack in his whatever. So he's on an island.
Well, you said he's coming to me though.
Oh, okay. So what would you on this looking at this podcast? What would you tell him?
What would I tell him? I would tell him. I'll tell you. Every Yid is incredibly precious. Every Yid is a son and daughter of Hashem. And by the way, that's where our self-esteem should come from. Immediately. Not how many hours I learned, not what a great tzaddik is today I am. My self-esteem comes because I am a child of Hashem. And I am important. And Hashem values me. Hashem loves me. And I'm important. And my actions count. We just had the parsha of the Nesiim, Parshas Nasai, whatever this is broadcasted, but we have Parshas Nesiim, and the Torah repeats the Nasi, each Nasi's karbanos. So there are different explanations, but recently I have a simple pshat that I like. The Torah wants to tell you, you could be bringing the same karbanos. I know the shtickle Torah that each person has different kavanas, but without that, you're bringing the same carbon. He's bringing the same carbon. The fact that he's bringing the same carbon doesn't make your carbon less precious. The fact that you're learning Torah and he's also learning Torah doesn't make your Torah learning Torah less precious. Your mitzvah is precious. Your Torah is precious. You are precious. And you should try to find yourself people that will help you feel that way and appreciate that.
So how do we develop individuality and creativity and uniqueness in a world where you have 6,000 people in your grade, you have 1,000 people in your block? I'm assuming, let's say you're living in Lakewood, you're living in Muncie, or you're living in San Jose, but you're in a yeshiva that has 500 people. How do you strike a balance between being socially with it and normal and up to date, and you're one of the guys, but you're also an individual and you have your individuality and your imagination, your creativity, which I think are integral components of achieving greatness. I don't mean becoming a gadol hador. I mean, how do someone maintain or create individuality in a world where it's so easy to just be like everyone else?
So I think the challenge you're referring to is really a challenge that, happens when Bachrim are younger, right? If you look at people that are married, 30 years old, 40 years old, we don't really have that question because everyone's doing something different. Everyone has their own family. There's a lot of individuality. But in yeshiva, they're all wearing their white shirts and their hand jacket and they're learning and doing the same thing. And by the way, for that reason, some Bachrim try to find individuality through, they can't wear a colored shirt in most yeshivas, but try to find socks. Maybe they could sneak in a black sock with a stripe, whatever. So I can have my individuality.
No, but that's my point. They're screaming.
So I want to explain. But I want to tell those Bachrim, and I want to just share the idea. I allow a little bit more in my yeshiva individuality with dress, but the individuality, clothing is a very cheap way to express individuality. I'm not knocking it for someone that needs to do it, but at the end of the day, if what makes me different than you is that, we look pretty much right. We're both wearing black jackets, white shirts, no ties. So we look at beards, we look the same. You look a little younger, less gray hair. But, if our individuality is that I'm wearing different clothing than you, that's pretty weak. Individuality is not in clothing. Individuality is in our thoughts and our actions. Now, while we're younger, a lot of our actions are going to look the same. But as we get older, that thought process, that development that you're working on yourself, if you've been working on your midos, for example, if you've been working on yourself as a person, as you get older, Bez Hashem, you will be able to give and offer and express, and your individuality will shine. While you're in yeshiva, There's limited opportunities for individuality to shine. And if you try too hard, it's you just stand out. But inside yourself, individuality is found inside the person, and then it blossoms as you get older. So it's very important you think for yourself. You could think, you could think for yourself. Your Rosh Hashiva gives a shmooze on a certain topic. I may get in trouble for saying this. And you don't agree. You don't like it. Individuality means that I have a brain. My Rebbe taught us a chiddush, right, Per Zatzal. He taught us that just because your Rebbe said something, you need to understand it. You have to be responsible for it. If your Rebbe tells you to do something, if your Rebbe tells you to shoot somebody, you have to understand what he's telling you. You can't just walk around, my Rebbe said it. You have to own whatever your Rebbe taught you. I'm not saying there's never a place to say, I don't understand that my Rebbe said it, but you have to own it. So this bacher, who you want individuality, when the Rosh Hashiva is talking, try to understand what he's saying. If you don't understand it, go ask him. If he doesn't have the time for you, talk to some other Rebbe or Rav and say, I don't know if I understand this. Even in Gemara learning, so many times the Rebbe says a pshat in the Taisvis, in the Gemara, and I don't like it. So Bacher conforms, okay, but that's a pshat. That's what the Rosh Hashiva said. No, that's not Torah. Torah is yours. So individuality is in our mind. We have to teach Bachrim to have individuality in their thoughts, in their development. It doesn't have to be with clothing. Every yeshiva could have its own dress code, but to teach them to be independent thinkers. That's what my Rebbe taught. My Rebbe Per was a very unique person, and he really taught us to think for ourselves. And that's why Baruch Hashem, his Talmidim are quite different. But the funny thing is that a lot of times people can actually spot us out and say, oh, you probably learned by Ray Per. Because there's stands out the uniqueness. But he taught us to think for ourselves.
So you mentioned that clothing is probably the cheapest way of expressing yourself. You also mentioned that it typically weeds itself out when one gets into adulthood just because of the nature of having kids and a family makeup. But you do see so many 40, 50, 60-year-olds who they're going to wear a $5,000 tie, which is essentially their way of saying, I'm going to spend $5,000 for you to approve of me. Or I am going to spend a ridiculous amount of money on a $500,000 car, which it's not that much more comfortable than a $40,000 car. It's a $500,000 you're going to spend for other people to observe and say, hey, this guy is unique. This guy is impressive. So it seems like a major... So you disagree that it's not coming from there?
I disagree with you that that's their goal. Their goal is not to establish individuality. Their goal is to receive approval. Their goal is to receive kavod. And that goes back to what I said before. Our job as parents and mechanchim, foremost, I think this is the most important thing in chinuch, as I mentioned before, is to build people's self-esteem. When we don't feel good about ourselves, we look for other people's approval. If I wasn't the biggest Talmud Chacham, but now I'm very successful financially, and by the way, many of them suffered when they were in yeshiva being the shvacha bacher, and now they have a chance to finally get people's approval. Now they have a chance to get the yeshiva coming, asking him for money, and be honored. I'm not saying people get honored for this reason. It's a big chesed to get honored, but people want to establish themselves to get other people's approval. I wrote a whole English sefer on kavod. I don't know if you saw it. It's called Run After the Right Kavod. The more someone feels good about themselves, the less they need other people's approval. As well, if we really work on ourselves, we become more intelligent. Oh, because I'm driving a fancy car and everyone is impressed, that's a reason that I should feel good about myself?
Right? Isn't it like
No,
people should be embarrassed? You should be embarrassed. You have to spend that much money.
I'm not judging any petty people. I'm very against judging people's spendings. People say, why is he flying private? Why is he spending the money? I don't judge any people's spendings. I don't have the kind of money, so I don't have the opportunity to withhold. If I had the kind of money and was not spending it, we could talk. I don't judge people's spendings. And many of those people are so generous with tzedakah and such giving people. I don't judge other people's spending. I think people only judge other people's spending because they're jealous, etc. Unless they're a Rav who's trying to be mechanech his kehila. It doesn't bother me. I don't look. I don't think. So I want to say like this. I'm just saying. I'm not judging why the guy's driving his fancy car. Is it just to get people's approval, etc., etc., etc. there's no question that there's a lot of that. And you'll say, well, isn't that shallow? Like, that this is what you think is valuable. They have a fancy car, but it's not just about the car, right? If I heard this from someone else recently, so it's not my idea, but it's quite simple. If I'm driving $500,000 car, then you understand that I'm running a successful business, and I feel good about myself that I run a successful business. So instead of taking advertisements out there and saying I have a successful business, my car, my watch, my suit, my bar mitzvah, my wedding shows that I'm a successful person financially. But I will say that if we were giving the kavod to people when they're younger, people would have a less need for it and less interest in it. And also, there's another thing here. If the people around us, in general, weren't so, listen, if you had people, I'm not saying I'm above Gashmias, but all I could tell you is that, and again, obviously, I'm a Rosh Hashiva, I'm in Chinuch, so I'm just giving an example. But if everyone around a person was like me, they're not pulling up in the $500,000 car, I'll probably make them feel good because I'm nice. So it's such a nice car. But at the end of the day, they're not bringing me the car. Hopefully they'll bring me a Gemara. They'll give me a Vart because they know I'm not going crazy. So we have to raise people to feel good about themselves because they're Yidden and proud Jews. And if we were more proud of being Jews, we'd be a little bit less proud about things like money.
Very well said. So I want to talk about one final thing, which is a difficult topic, but in the topic of Bochrim, who are struggling with Inyane Kedusha, many Bochrim have this issue where they've tried everything. They're on an island because, they went to Walmart during Second Seder one day. They bought a $15 smartphone, and they could do whatever they want. They tried to put a filter on it. They could take off the filter. No one knows that they have it. It's essentially an immensely personal battle that I don't know what percentage of Bachram have to deal with, but a lot. What advice would you give to people, Bachrim especially, who are for very often battling this in private and in secret with immense sadness and depression that comes along with the pain of falling in this tsunami of Tumah?
So I don't think the challenge is limited to Bachram. And certainly if a Bacher's facing challenges, it doesn't just necessarily run away when he's older. And plenty of adults struggle. So I think it's important that it's not just to point out it's not just a Bachram struggle. I rarely talk to my own Talmidim, my own Bachram about Inyanim of Shmir Sinai. And I explain to them why. And I'll tell you what I do tell them. This is what I do tell them. The greatest challenge of technology is not what we see as much as what happens to us after we see. The Yetzer Hara is great after we looked at something to tell us what a bum we are because we looked at that. And then he plays back every schmooze we heard since 9th grade about what it does to you and what type of person you are if you look at stuff. And I don't want to be another one of those recordings for that bacher when he falls. So therefore, I don't talk so much about the severity. And I have to mechazik myself, but I don't talk the severity of Shmir Sinayim. What I talk to Bachram primarily is about chizuk, about encouragement, about not giving up. When a person feels depressed, feels bad that he watched something he shouldn't have watched, it's actually not a mitzvah. It's actually a hechsher avera. What happens when a bacher feels bad? He may watch again. He may wake up late the next morning, etc. And I think it's a terrible message if ever it's said, like, if someone's watching this, then how could he be learning Taisus? Or how could he be davening? That's like, to me, that sounds like apikarsis. I mean, averas and mitzvahs don't cancel out. An avera doesn't cancel out a mitzvah. Learning Torah, davening, doing mitzvahs gives us strength, ultimately, to be able to push out the Yetzer Hara. I have to share with you a great Vart. I thought before that maybe it would come up. Is there a sitter there? So we say in Kriya Shema, we say, You should see the tzitzis and remember all the mitzvot Hashem. So it's a pella. Because a pasuk or two later, we say again, it's amazing about davening. So many questions that we can keep reading and don't notice. We say twice, Laman Tiskru. What's going on? What's remembering twice? The Sefarno says something amazing. The Sefarno, if I understand him correctly, says that Laman Tiskru is not going on seeing the tzitzis. We already did that already. You saw the tzitzis, you remember Mitzvah Hashem. It's a continuation of V'lo Yisasuru. Don't get distracted by all the Yitzhara, by all the desires. In order to focus on Hashem. The goal of not looking and separating ourselves is not just a mission unto itself. It's part of the whole mission of Kiddush, of getting close to Hashem. It's positive. It's not negative. When a bacher sees something, an adult sees something shouldn't look at, I think the most important thing is he doesn't get depressed. Depression's not about Hashem. I'll prove it to you. If it was about Hashem, so why am I sleeping late tomorrow? Why am I messing up further? Imagine a husband always comes home late. He's apologized. I feel so bad. And then he comes home later and later. If you feel so bad that you went against Hashem, so then why are you continuously doing it? And why are you not davening more the next day? Why are you not waking up early to learn, to make up? You can never cancel, but to show Hashem. Now I'm learning more because I saw something I shouldn't see. Now I want to learn more. So it's not really about Hashem. It's about myself. I feel bad. I feel like a loser. And that's why on Yom Kippur, people are not depressed. People are happy because they're doing tshuva. I'm getting closer to Hashem. It's positive, right? It's an unbelievable thing on Yom Kippur. My favorite piyut, Kiyanu amecha v'yato Elokeinu. Hopefully I get the words right. So we sing to Hashem, we are your people. And then right afterwards, Hashem, and now that we sing, Hashem nu bagad. If someone be listening from outside and hearing that going on, baganu gazalnu dibarnu daifi. Say, what were you guys just saying? We were guilty, we rebelled, we stole. It's that mishuga. Because we have a simcha. We want to be better. It's positive. We want to be better. Depression that Bachram feel and adults feel when they look at something is not a mitzvah. It's a hachshah avera. I wanted to say, and someone told me afterwards it says it somewhere. Maybe I saw it. But the Gemara says in Yuman Chavches, Hiruri avera kasha me'avera. So I want to suggest, Hiruri avera kasha me'avera. The thoughts of sin are worse than sin. It means the thoughts after you sin, not before you sin. The thoughts after you sin are more difficult. They cause much more damage than the sin. The reason why people are torn apart today is not because they saw things they shouldn't see. It's because afterwards they felt like pieces of garbage and it caused them to fall apart. I tell my bachrim, you looked at something you shouldn't look at, do me a favor. Learn for 5 minutes afterwards. Right afterwards, learn for 5 minutes. One word of Torah is 613 mitzvahs. You'll get thousands and thousands of mitzvahs. More mitzvahs than you got of errors. Of course, it doesn't cancel out. You have to do tshuva, but at the end of the day, you want to show Hashem, you messed up, now I want to do something good. If people would do this, I think ultimately they would get clean too. Because I'm going to learn now, I messed up. I'm going to go to chakras the next day. I'm going to learn, and eventually I will push it out. It ties back, I'm sorry, but to me, like, so much of Yiddishkeit comes down to kavod. The person watching what he shouldn't look at, it destroys his self-kavod. And it shouldn't. Okay, we can feel bad, we can regret it, and that helps us maybe not do it again. But at the end of the day, I'm still a Yid. Hashem still cares about me. Hashem still wants me to learn. Hashem still wants my davening. My kavod has to stay strong. My self-kavod has to stay strong. Most people, unfortunately, if they're not told this, and sometimes told the opposite, if you look at this, you're this, you da-da-da. It's funny. No one ever says about Lashon Hara, that if you say Lashon Hara, you're a bum, you're a Rasha, you can't die. And the Chavetz Chaim talks about it, but we don't give those shmooze. Why don't we give those shmooze? Because, well, I know I say Lashon Hara. I know Bachram struggle Lashon Hara. I don't want to get them depressed. And then all of a sudden comes a Shmir Sinai, boom, full court press, boom, let's beat them up. No one says a Bittul Torah even, because you don't want to get guys to like lose their mind. You got Bivaltul Torah, which again, it's scary, but the Mesil Sharm, it's a word more Chamar Aveira. So we don't talk that way because we don't want to get people depressed. And all of a sudden we think it's okay to tell Bachram that if they looked at something, like that's it, the end. You messed up. It's not as bad as Lashon Hara. You messed up. So now pick up a sefer, learn for 5 minutes. Get up 5 minutes earlier to Shachris tomorrow. If people would do this, I believe they would get themselves out of the mess. Part of the mess is the depression, is the giving up, is the despondency. There is such a thing of addiction. But I want to tell you, and where you define addiction, don't define addiction is complicated, but so much mental health problems and so much addiction comes from one word. To me, it's the magic word. What's the magic word?
Covered.
Covered. Just that people should feel good about themselves. We should feel good. We're Yidden. We're precious. And by the way, it keeps the person humble because it's not I'm precious. Reb Hillel, you're precious. The ninth grader in your Mesifta, I don't care, he's 4 years younger than you, he's precious. The 3-year-old is precious. A Yid is precious. This is what we need to give over. The one message, if this is what we end with, we don't have to end. The message I want to give over is this is what we need to go. If you want to talk about one area that we need to get going in Klal Yisrael more and more and more, is every Yid is precious. Every Yid's valuable. Every Yid's important. That's it. If we feel good about ourselves, we also stop looking at these things and doing these things because I feel too good to be involved with that.
Excellent. So just as a final takeaway message, what would you say to the thousands and thousands of young men and women out there starting their lives, whether recently married or have been married for 5 years, who want to stay on fire as Yidden? What message would you say to retain their kavod, to put to the forefront their unfathomable preciousness, and instead of living a life after 120 looking back and saying, I just chased Narishkeit my whole life, really, really focusing on the fire of Yiddishkeit as opposed to the Narishkeit of the rest of the world? What parting message would you say to help them, enable them to live a life where they're on fire?
So my thought would be, I'll start like this. I was recently at some type of panel by a good convention. Don't worry, it was in a side room, a small thing, but okay, still was a kavod. And we can talk about it another time. There's real kavod and fake kavod. That was a fake kavod, although it was a real kavod that somebody asked me. But after that, it's fake, right? Right? Anyways, you know what I'm saying. Someone asks you to be Misar Kiddushin or get a bracha, the one that asked you gave you the kavod. Everything after that is a show. Okay. But anyways, so they asked me this question. The question was, how do you deal with technology? How do you deal with social media and everything like that? And I said that a person who is not busy, person's not busy with good things, is going to end up being busy probably with narishkeit. You can't tell a person, get off social media, get rid of your smartphone, get rid of these things, and then have a void with nothing to do. Unfortunately, today people have a lot of anxiety, so then if they have nothing to do, they're anxious. But you can't leave people with voids, The Sforna we just said, Don't get distracted with all the other things. L'man tiskru. In order that you should remember, in order that you should be focused on doing the mitzvahs. So I would tell people to get busy. We need to be busy. I started my own learning project recently. It's mamish changed my life the last year or so. We need to be busy. So we have to get busy with things. We have to be busy with women, busy with chesed, find shiurim. Different people may talk to us, find shiurim that we like, find svarim that we like, find chesed projects that interest us. We need to be busy with good things. Men, busy with learning. We need to be busy with good things. If we're not busy with good things, then I think it's inevitable. As Chazal tell us, we're going to end up with sin. We're going to end up not feeling good about ourselves. Again, we should recognize who we are, despite everything we've done wrong in the past. I just shared with my Bachram an incredible Gemara that Nebuzradan, who killed millions and millions of people. And it's hard to say it over, but it's a Gemara. In Gin and in Zayim Beis. He became a Ger Tzedek. How he was accepted, I don't know. But he became a Ger Tzedek. He became a Yid. And I think there's a godless on Nebuzradan's part. He should have said, I killed millions of people. It's over. Kill yourself. You can't. It's forbidden. Okay, so lock yourself in a room. He became a Yid. He didn't say, I killed millions of people, so my life is over. We cannot take away the past. Certainly most of us didn't murder anybody. We can't take away the past, especially if we hurt people. We could do tshuva, and Hashem has a lot of compassion. But there's the whole present and future. But we need to be busy. We need to be busy with doing good things.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kestenbaum, for coming on and joining.
Thank you. A lot of fun.